Weather-wise this week, well, ratepayers in the Bega Valley and Snowy Monaro will face much higher rates if the rate increases are approved by the Independent Pricing and Regulatory Tribunal, or IPART. The Bega Valley Shire Council has applied to IPART for a special rate variation of 43%, and Snowy Monaro Council has applied for a special rate variation of 53%. It's now up to IPART to assess those applications and decide whether the special rate variations can go ahead. And here to explain more about that process is the chair of IPART, Carmel Donnelly. Carmel, thanks so much for joining us on ABC Southeast.
You're welcome, Simon. Good morning.
I'm guessing this is among a lot of different special rate variation requests that you've had from around the state.
We've received 13, and just to give you a bit of background, there are 128 councils, and we do decide and calculate a rate peg for each council each year, which sets the maximum amount that councils can increase their revenue that they collect from rates. But if a council decides it needs to increase its total rates revenue by more than that, it can apply to seek approval for additional increases, and that's what we call a special variation. So we've received 13, and yes, you're correct, Bega Valley Shire Council has put in an application. We received those applications Friday afternoon, and Snowy Monaro Regional Council has also applied for a variation. And I will also just add that Queanbeyan and Palorang Regional Council has notified us, given us an advance notification that they would like to put one in too, but they've asked for an extension of time. So I would be able to talk to you about that later. We're not sure, what will happen with that, but I can talk about Bega Valley and Snowy Monaro for you.
Is 13 a high number compared to previous years?
Look, it does vary quite a lot. Some years we'll have 5 or 6. There was a recent year where there was quite a bit of pressure on councils because inflation was low and then it went high, and people had obviously we've all had tough times in terms of COVID and so on. So we had a very large number of applications. So this is more probably closer to the normal range. And I wouldn't read too much into the number. It's a matter that individual councils will come to a decision at the time that suits them.
Okay. And 43% the request from the Bega Valley Shire Council and 53% for Snowy Monaro. Are those high numbers? Special rate variation requests usually lower than that?
They often are. And let me just clarify. They're clearly not small numbers, but I will just reassure, I guess, everybody who'd be interested in this. Our next step is to carefully assess, and so I'm not going to make any comments about the strength of the case for that increase until we've done a full assessment.
Sure. Yep. What does that assessment involve?
Well, the first thing we're going to do in our next steps, obviously, is we carefully look at all the detail, the applications against 5 criteria that are set by the Office of Local Government. And that includes how well the need for the increase in rates above the rate peg is demonstrated. It includes looking at the community awareness of the need and extent. So we do expect that councils will have done consultation with their communities. We look at whether the impact on ratepayers is reasonable, and that includes looking at, what the cost of living is, affordability, but also the impact that might be there, knowing that a lot of the services provided by local government are things people can't do without, and they need financial viability to continue those services. We look at whether they've publicly exhibited all of their planning documents, and do they have a good history of making productivity improvements and containing costs themselves. Now, while we're doing that, we will publish these applications and all the supporting documentations by the end of this week. They'll all be up on IPART's website. And from Friday this week, we will be calling for submissions for a 3-week period up until the 3rd of March, because we will look, while we're looking closely at the financial situation, we also want to consider community input. We consider all relevant information and we read every submission.
Okay. And when looking at the impact on ratepayers, do you consider the other cost of living increases that we've seen lately, I guess from the petrol bowser to mortgage rates and grocery prices as well?
Yes, we certainly consider, when in all of New South Wales, we know that people have had tough times, and we do look at the cost of living, affordability. We look at what are the incomes in the council area, what are similar councils charging for their rates, does it look reasonable, does it look like a fair ask? And then from the other side, we look very closely at their expenses, their whole financial situation, and whether or not it looks like a fair ask from that perspective. It's interesting because Snowy Monaro, for instance, has said that the purpose for them is to improve financial sustainability. So we will weigh up the cost of living with, as I said, the need for financial sustainability so those services can continue to be provided. Bega Valley Shire Council has told us that they also have an infrastructure backlog and they need to partly fund some of the maintenance and renewal for existing assets. So in looking at that impact, we would be looking at what's the impact on the community if that's demonstrated that they need the money to maintain assets, then what would happen if that money wasn't there, and what would that impact be on the community as well? So really looking at a fair ask and looking at all sides of that impact on ratepayers. But we do also look at whether there is hardship support available, for instance, how well the council might publicise that and provide that. We do have a close look at what is the impact for the more vulnerable people in the community. So take all of that into account. And it's very helpful if people give us feedback when we open for submissions relevant to those 5 criteria, but including the impact on ratepayers. Of course, hearing straight from ratepayers themselves is very helpful to us.
Okay. And how do people do that?
Right. Well, it's very easy. Once we've opened the submissions on Friday, you will be able to come onto the IPART website. We've got a web form that sort of steps you through, which you could follow. You can, if you want, write, a submission and email it to us or post it to us, and the information is there as well. But the form on our site is probably the easiest. You can write as little as you like. It can be as short as you like or as long as you like. It's all feedback's very welcome.
And you mentioned hardship policies. You look at whether councils have those in place. Typically, what's a common sense policy or way for councils to make sure that people aren't struggling to pay too much?
Right. Well, the first thing that we always expect is that councils, they're elected by and they represent their community, that they're working through with their community what their community would want. So I've seen that councils will have some different approaches to hardship depending on what will support their community. We would be looking at how easy is it for people to access that and have a talk with council about what hardship support they need and what is available to them. So we'll look at that in our process.
And what is the timeline here? Because councils are telling us that they'd like to implement these changes this year.
Yes. So for the ones that we've received so far, so Bega Valley and Snowy Monaro, we are looking to have decisions in May, and mostly when councils put in a special variation, they do ask for it to start from 1 July. Occasionally they'll have changes that they don't want to start on 1 July, but I'm not sure from these, having not read them yet, whether that's in there. I can tell you that for Bega Valley, they are looking at staggering the increase over 2 years. So there would be an increase that they're looking for from July, and then another one the next year after that. The other thing I think it's important for people to know, a couple of things. We don't approve everyone. It's not a rubber stamp. We look at it very closely. Sometimes we don't approve. Sometimes we don't approve it in full. And if we hear that, for instance, there's concerns about will the money be spent where it was supposed to be spent, well, we can put conditions on. So we will sometimes approve it, but put a condition on the council that they need to publish information about where the money is going to make sure that they can be held accountable by their community. And the other thing I think people may not be aware of is that we are looking at assessing how much above the rate peg council can increase its total rates revenue. Doesn't automatically flow through to every individual ratepayer. So council can still make its own decisions about how much rates for different ratepayers will increase up to the maximum, and they don't have to move it up to the maximum at all for the total amount, and they certainly don't have to move it up to the maximum for every ratepayer.
And I'd like to get your response to something that the President of the Local Government New South Wales, Daria Turley, told me late last month when I was speaking to her about special rate variations. She told us that rate pegging hasn't been keeping up to inflation and that IPART made determinations in the past couple of years which were well below inflation. Does she have a point there about, you know, decisions by IPART in the past contributing to the need for greater increases today?
Look, I think it's not necessarily the case for every council, but it is something that we're looking at. We are, at the same time as these special variations, undertaking a very thorough review of the methodology that we use. So we are consulting quite closely with Local Government New South Wales and seeking input at the same time about, for future years, how we could improve the methodology. I will let you know that the rate peg has been set in the past to increase the typical costs incurred by councils, and then allow the councils to increase their rates to keep up with those costs, and then so they can provide services to their communities. Now, on one issue around keeping up with inflation, the way that we do this is we keep in mind that if we were to adjust it just for CPI, which people will have heard about, which is the general inflation figure, we'd be including things like about a quarter of the CPI is the cost of housing for a family. Now, that's not a cost that local government has, and it includes, you know, food and beverages and furnishings and so on, whereas local governments have costs to do with roads and road maintenance, construction, and a range of other costs. So we have been working to very fairly reflect the inflation and the increases in costs that are the ones that councils have, and not give them extra rates because of costs that they don't bear. So that's been part of what we've thought about in the past, because we're also trying to protect ratepayers from excessive increases.
Okay.
But I will also say that we're aware that because of the way that we've done that, we've used ABS data, and there's a bit of a time lag. And certainly we had a year there during where there was very low inflation because of COVID, and then it increased very rapidly, and there was a lag. And so that has prompted us to want to review, and we really welcome the review of the methodology so that it's fairer for councils during times of a lot of economic change.
Well, it's wonderful to get a more thorough understanding of how it works and a lot of the different factors involved, and particularly how people can make submissions to IPART. I really appreciate your time this morning, Carmel. Thanks a lot.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Carmel Donnelly there. She's the chair of IPART, which is the Independent Pricing and Regulatory Tribunal, which now has the task of assessing all the ratepayer submissions on the applications from both Bega Valley and Snowy Monaro councils for big special rate variations. Your thoughts on that? You can text me 0467 922 684. It's 27 after 7. Let's find out what's in store for us weather.